we can go live.
Okay, I can only see whoever's talking, so it doesn't matter to me.
No, it's just what's up here. Let's see. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Hi, ladies. How's it going?
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Lindsay Gray. I'm the director of VECINA, and we have Taylor Levy and Jodi Goodwin here, two of our border warrior VECINA mentors, to discuss the processing for MPP folks that's going to start on Friday. So how's everybody doing? Crazy busy?
Yes, very crazy busy.
Crazy busy.
Jodi?
Crazy cold. No lights and no water, but I'm in my car and there's a heater in the car, so that's good.
Awesome. I'm glad you're warm. And yeah, similar with us, Austin is also having an ice apocalypse. And so we just got our hot water back on this morning, which has been a treat, and I'm hoping it stays that way. All right, so we know from the previous announcement that the government is going to start processing individuals subject to MPP into the United States starting this coming Friday in 2 days.
Yes.
So we wanted to get together and just chat for a bit about, you know, what that means for the attorneys that are representing folks subject to MPP. So, so can anyone just tell me sort of what the registration process will look like?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start and then I'll toss it to Jodi. Does that work for you? Yeah. So what we know right now is a few people, at least some small number of people, should be processed in on Friday, actually on Friday. As anything that the government does, they do things in rollouts, they do things in pilot programs and slow, and then they're ramping up. And so we believe that people will be processed on Friday. We'll see if it actually happens. But we also believe on Friday, an online portal will go live. It has accidentally, perhaps is what it seems like, gone live a little bit today. And so there may be a few people who are able to register, a very tiny number of people who are able to register on this portal. It was not officially announced. It was leaked by someone else on Facebook. And then because of that leak, I decided to publish it as well. And it is an ACNUR website. So the UNHCR, the UN High Commission on Refugees, is going to be in charge of doing the registration for people with active MPP cases, and then working with the Mexican government and the US government to do the processing in of people into the United States. And so that website will go live for real on Friday, to the best of our knowledge, but there still hasn't been a super formal announcement.
Yeah, I think it's important that we go ahead and just say what that website is to Taylor. So they'll be able to find it at Conecta, CONECTA.ACNUR, ACNUR.org. And that'll take you to their homepage. And on that page, it'll give you a choice as to where you can register. There's also a couple of other choices where you can just find general information about processing in Mexico for refugee status and such. But you'll want to click on the tab for registering your MPP case.
Yeah, and I think Taylor, I went to the link that you shared on Facebook, and I think now it does say, like, starting Friday, you can come here and click into the portal. And so do you guys feel like people can go ahead and share that link with their clients so that on Friday morning, everybody can hop on, and start registering? I think
it's a,
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say,
I think it's, all right, okay, you go.
I was gonna say, and we're probably about to say the same thing. One of the things that's important, I think, for the community to know is that even if you are the first person to register on Friday, that does not mean it's not in order of when you register. So why don't you, somebody talk about when?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So we were at the same mind. I think for immigration attorneys, it's easier for us to think about, because it's the same way they've talked about, like with the asylum office. It's going to be a FIFO system, first in, first out. It's going to be a system primarily based upon, as far as we know, because we don't work for the government, but as far as we know from the leaks and the conversations we've been in, it's going to be based upon your NTA date. So it's going to be based upon when you were put into MPP, your NTA date, which obviously the government has access to all this information. And so the very front of the line would theoretically be January 29th, 2019. And the very end of the line would theoretically be January 19th, 2021. Like that would be the whole line. And so where you're in the middle, but it's only active cases. So obviously a lot of those cases from the beginning aren't necessarily still active. So no one knows how long the line's going to take to move. But with that, it'll mostly be based upon your NTA date, with some exceptions being made for vulnerable populations, which will be defined by the UN and the governmental partners, not by individual immigration attorneys. They're telling us that there'll be some way for us to flag specifically vulnerable cases to UNHCR, but they haven't given that possibility, that process for us yet. It'll probably be just emailing a certain email, and then they'll be making the decisions about who's vulnerable. And individual immigration lawyer practitioners are encouraged to continue to seek humanitarian parole on behalf of their clients outside of this ACNUR system, both for people in MPP and if you have other folks who are outside of the MPP system and trying to seek asylum.
I want to add a couple of points there too. First off, to the sort of competitiveness of, you know, trying to be able to register first. I anticipate, only because I've dealt with so many government registration websites, that as soon as the website goes live for people to register, it will probably crash. And I think that people just need to get the message that, you know, don't worry about that, because they are going to be processing people, you know, on a first in, first out basis based on NTA dates. It's not going to make a difference. I mean, you could be somebody who, you know, originally was placed in MPP back, you know, February 1, 2019, and you don't register until, you know, 3 days after the portal goes live, and you should still be processed before somebody who just got turned back and was placed in MPP in November 2020. I mean, so I think that, and that's the purpose of having this portal, is to make it so that they can have a bird's eye view of who's still in Mexico waiting, so that they can sort of prioritize and put people in order as to when they're going to process. The other thing too is that, you know, just because of the nature of the way MPP was rolled out, is people that are in California are most likely going to go first because they have the oldest MPP dates. So it could mean that, you know, we'll see a rolling wave, you know, sort of from California going east of people actually being processed. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I could be completely wrong about that, but that just seems the most logical thing based on what's been announced. And then the other thing that I wanted to emphasize for attorneys is we have at least gotten like a little sneak peek of what is going to be asked for on the portal. So I think it's important that you go ahead and get ready with your clients to have the information that they're going to be needing. And it seems to be fairly basic, certainly a lot more basic than a lot of the crazy rumors that, you know, get thrown around on Facebook and chat groups and such. But basically, you're going to need name, a number, a phone number, and email. You're going to need to know what port of entry that you were originally processed for MPP, and what was your MPP processing date, so the date on your NTA. That's the information they're asking for. Other than that, we don't know. I mean, I don't have answers. I've already had a couple of attorneys have called and said, well, do we need to register every single person in the family? I don't know. The way that the portal was set up, or at least the very minor glimpse that I could get of it, it does have a question that asks if there are other family members in MPP. I don't know if that's going to auto direct you to, you know, put in their name and their A numbers as well, or if it's something that will be worked out when the person has a phone call with ACNUR. Otherwise, you know, I guess each individual person could register, but if there are family groups, it'll just need to be flagged when they have their phone call with ACNUR to make sure that the family can be able to process together. So, and I guess since I talked about the phone call, I think that it's important to know that just because you register on that website, you're not going to automatically get, you know, some confirmation email or text message telling you, okay, appear this day on this bridge. That's not the way it's going to happen, at least as far as we know right now. As far as we know right now, there will be some follow-up. I don't know if it'll be a phone call or if it will be by email, but there will be some type of follow-up from ACNUR. And then after that is when people will potentially get an appointment date to go to a specific bridge to be processed in.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. So Taylor, and by the way, for anyone watching, I've posted the Conecta, like the general website below the live video. But once we know for sure what the appropriate link is, we will post it. But Taylor, the one that you had shared, I went to, and it says like coming Friday, it says it in Spanish, but starting Friday, February 19th, this will start. But then when you go to the general ACNUR website, you can click on register, and I saw similar to what Jodi's talking about, there is what appears to be a live, I didn't try to fill it out, but like a live registration form that seems to, if you click on it, then you will eventually get a phone call from ACNUR. Do we know which of those, or are they going to be the same thing?
I mean, that's news to me that seems possible right now. I think in general, ACNUR always provides services to people in need officially, right? And so I think that they always are accepting, they have significant protection officers in Mexico who are available. So that might have been on their general ACNUR website, less for MPP and more for general processing, like people who need help. So I wouldn't probably refer people to use that until this new site. If any lawyers hear that people were able to register on this Conecta ACNUR site, the MPP site, I do believe it was live, perhaps accidentally, for approximately an hour or something like that. And there maybe are some people who are able to register, but people who weren't able to get into that kind of beta testing accident type of a registration, I'm guessing accident, I don't work for ACNUR.
Right, yeah.
They shouldn't panic, right? About exactly what Jodi's saying about, it's going to be last in, first out, that type of a thing. What's going to happen is they're going to be told to go to some location that is near the ports, is the best of our understanding, where they will be processed on the Mexican side first. So that is what the Mexican government and UNHCR is planning, and those aren't specific details that we can share. It's definitely been leaked in the press somewhat. But in the LA Times article, if you want to look to that article, I'll post in the comments later, explaining this process. But at this point, we believe still it'll be the San Isidro, Tijuana port of entry, El Paso port of entry, and Brownsville, which means we believe, at least at this point, unless there are not changes, it will not be happening in Laredo, Nuevo Laredo. It will not be happening in Reynosa. It will not be happening in Nogales. And I point out those ports in particular because that's where we know there's a lot of migrants. But for example, in Nogales, they were the very last people to be registered in MPP. So it does make sense that they're going to be slower before they start allowing those people to be processed, because they're going to be towards the end of the list. And that's why the message continues to be that individual practitioners, whether with nonprofits or private lawyers, can continue to file humanitarian parole requests with CBP. I just ask from the bottom of my heart that lawyers be very honest about the likelihood of those requests being granted, as that it's still, even with Biden, it's very tiny. It's still going to be very hard to get those humanitarian parole requests granted. It's worth trying, but as long as I just hope that the marketing around that can be really honest.
Yeah, we discussed this. Kate Lincoln Goldfinch and I were on last week, and we were discussing humanitarian parole and vulnerable persons requests that seems like it's going to be directly related to this. And I said, we sound very 2017. We're very pessimistic. But yeah, I think that's true. A question on the vulnerable persons requests to get people processed faster. One thing that Kate and I were talking about last week was this idea of go ahead and start, if you believe that your client is specifically vulnerable, maybe get some documentation of medical records or police reports or anything of that nature. Do you think that knowing, again, not too much information, but the information we know now about a week later, do you think that people should continue to prepare in that way? Or should we wait for further instructions on exactly the definition of, vulnerable persons and how to make those requests?
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah, I think
you already
people
have
should,
clients.
Yeah, I think people should definitely go ahead and get that documentation ready. I mean, and I agree with Taylor. Go ahead and file those humanitarian parole requests. Don't wait until this registration process, or wait for ACNUR to make a decision as to whether somebody's vulnerable or not. I mean, I think you can make those requests directly to the port directors, wherever your clients are, and see where the cookie crumbles. I mean, we've had some success. We've had some denials in the last month. Since Biden's been in, more success than denials than like the entire time that Trump was. So yeah, it's definitely
varied
worth
a
it.
lot.
No.
It's very by port a lot, right? We've seen a little bit more success in Matamoros and Tijuana. We've seen virtually no success in El Paso, like literally essentially zero. There's a couple random cases. And so that's why I just ask that, yes, if you currently have clients, I would say the biggest thing that I don't want people to like go out and panic and say, I have to prove that I'm vulnerable, or because it's going to be small, because everyone in MPP is vulnerable. And I believe that whoever UNHCR picks as vulnerable is going to be some of the just worst of the worst cases, because unfortunately, particularly surviving past kidnappings, like in my opinion, I'm worried that just as we see that those don't pass non-refoulement interviews, particularly because it's not a prospective future fear of continued kidnapping. If you haven't been getting ongoing threats, maybe you were kidnapped a year ago and you're still struggling from the PTSD from that kidnapping or perhaps that rape. But I am worried that UNHCR might not necessarily classify that as future like emergent vulnerable population if you're not getting ongoing threats, for example, because we know so many people in MPP have been kidnapped, have been raped, have been just targeted over the past 2 years, that everyone is vulnerable. And so how they're making these decisions is probably going to be pretty highly horrific cases and medical cases.
Well, and I also want to make the point too that it has become very clear based on the denials that individuals that are pregnant are not going to be considered across the board vulnerable. Now, there's been 2 cases that I know about of severely high risk pregnancies where one of them, the baby needs, in utero surgery immediately, was able to get through. But I mean, in terms of pregnant moms, I don't believe that they will be, considered across the board as a vulnerable class.
I'm glad you bring that up because Kate and I specifically mentioned pregnant women last week. I mean, we didn't say they will be vulnerable, but we weren't sure and postulated that as a group. So it's good to know that that's likely not going to, at least across the board count. So really, it seems like what you ladies are saying is that we have to be really careful about how we advise our clients, what we expose them to in terms of trauma and re-trauma and things of that nature. And so, if client's got a significant medical condition and has some documents, at the ready, then that's great. But be careful in terms of, one, setting appropriate expectations about the likelihood that, humanitarian parole or vulnerable persons request is going to be granted. And 2, make a call about what you're willing to expose your client to from a trauma perspective, given that we don't have, specific instructions at this point.
Exactly.
Do you know if folks are going to be able to choose their port of entry, or if this is going to be, you are processed in because I know, for example, there was a group of migrants that were in Matamoros that were forcibly transferred by the Mexican government to Tijuana, which is hundreds, if not thousands of miles away, I believe. And so, getting back to Matamoros across Mexico would be dangerous and expensive. Do we know if people will be able to, for those people who have moved far, will they be able to process in at the ports where they are now closest to? Do we know?
I mean, we don't know. I mean, Jodi, you want to go?
Yeah, I don't think that we know 100%, but I do think that the messaging coming out of ACNUR is very clear. Quédate en casa. They want you to stay where you're at, which to me, I mean, I don't know, Taylor may have a different opinion, but to me, that means that they know and they have a realization that people are no longer near the port of entry that they, were placed in MPP. So I think that will probably be part of their follow-up when they talk with people in order to schedule them, a place to where they will present. They'll take into consideration where is the nearest port of entry that they're currently located at. But like I said, I don't know that for sure. Yeah.
I agree with Jodi. We don't know anything for sure. We don't have any official guidance. We don't have any official notices. However, that message Jodi and myself and all of the nonprofits have made extremely, extremely clear on every single call we've been on, either with, administration officials or DHS or with UNHCR. That fact has been very well shared. That, there's people who left Matamoros for Juarez. There's people who left Juarez for Matamoros. Even people obviously have moved around since the courts have been closed for approximately a year, and those messages are coming across. I want to talk for a second about what's an active case. Is now a good time for that?
No, perfect. Go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be one of the hardest things that we don't know right now, and that's very frustrating and might be one of the biggest areas where I believe attorneys might be even more successful, perhaps in terms of humanitarian paroles, versus and motions to reopen versus perhaps trying to get people identified as vulnerable. Right now, what they're saying that phase 1 is going to be active cases before EOIR. And so that's the way the official announcements have come out. So we're lawyers. What's the EOIR? EOIR includes the Board of Immigration Appeals. The Board of Immigration Appeals is part of EOIR. That's an active case. That's not a final order of removal when an appeal is pending. However, when we directly ask for specific confirmation that BIA open appeals count as active cases, we are not getting that confirmation clearly from the government officials or from UNHCR. So we believe that open BIA appeals will be included as active cases just based on the plain language of it. However, they have not chosen to come out with that message super explicitly. So that's a question I'm getting constantly from migrants themselves. What that also means is my opinion, which is all preliminary based upon the conversations we've been in, is that that will unfortunately not include pending motions to reopen, pending PFRs, pending appeals of denied motions to reopen, right? There's people who did a motion to reopen with the IJ and have appealed that. I do not believe any of those cases will be considered active cases for the purposes of phase 1. And that means there's going to have to be different kinds of negotiations or, for attorneys who have cases in that procedural posture, if they want to get them in quicker and during phase 1, they're going to probably have to be doing outside lobbying of some sort, I believe. And I know that there's not that many people in MPP with PFRs, to be honest, but obviously some folks listening to this talk have some. I believe Jodi probably has some, right? But it is relatively small group, right, of who's taken MPP cases to the PFR level, but with motions to reopen. But I don't believe, for example, at this point in time, a strategy of filing a motion to reopen to kind of magically convert someone into a phase 1 person, you know what I mean? I don't think filing a motion to reopen, in my opinion, is going to magically turn somebody into a phase 1 active case. That is my speculation, that it's not official, but that's my belief. Does that mean that filing motions to reopen is not a good idea? Not at all. It might be a very good idea depending on the specifics of clients and potential clients who come to you who explain, why they missed their court case or why they need a motion to reopen, what kind of exceptional circumstances existed. But it might also be a situation where you might want to wait to see if in phase 2, hopefully what we're hoping for is that I think in MPP there's over 40,000 absentia orders, for example, that there is some sort of a broad, widespread liberal motions to reopen, where the government and the administration recognizes the fact that these courts were unjust and people missed them for for all kinds of reasons, and people lost their cases on the merits for reasonable reasons, and so that there be some sort of broad motions to reopens being allowed. And so the problem of doing a one-off motion to reopen right now, you're going to run into problems of the numerical bar, of time bars, of the departure bar in the Fifth Circuit, and judges interpreting it in different ways. So in those cases, it might be the best plan to strategically hold off on motions to reopen. And in individual cases, it might be the best plan to file a motion to reopen. But I keep getting asked what to do. And I'm like, it's case by case. And Jodi is the expert on motions to reopen. So what do you think?
I wanted to add on to that. Of course, myself and everybody else that practices along the border, we've been getting inundated with migrants, texting or calling, wanting to have their cases reopened. And the conversation that I have with people over and over and over and over and over and over and over again is filing a motion to reopen, especially to apply for asylum, is probably one of the most complicated, most difficult legal strategies that one can implement if you're going to do it right. And unfortunately for me, I was a clerk at the immigration court before I went into private practice, and I have seen more than my fair share of really crappy ass motions to reopen that don't meet all of the requirements of the statute or the regulations, and quite often are just flat out denied because they don't meet those requirements. So, in addition to, presenting evidence as to what might be the exceptional circumstances to why you failed to appear, you also have to present an application, and you have to show at least some fairly likelihood that you would win on that application. I mean, you're not only preparing a motion to reopen, you're preparing the baseline asylum claim as well at the same time that you actually submit something. So to willy-nilly file motions to reopen is really, really misguided. Now, whether or not, I might look at a case to file a motion to reopen, sure, but I want to know about the whole case. And I want to have all the documents and evidence available to me to be able to do a motion to reopen well before I'm going to do it. So with that being said, I want to double underscore, bold, 36-point font, highlight, wait to see what the requirements are going to be for phase 2 and phase 3. Here's why. One, see point number 1, it's really hard to do. But 2, let's take a really hard look at the reality of which judges would get these motions to reopen. All right, I'll let you think about that for a second. It's the same ones that were the MPP judges. Now, I'm not a psychic or anything, but they are not likely to grant those motions to reopen unless they have some general order indicating that they have to grant these motions to reopen. So wait to see what phase 2 and phase 3 are. And I can't tell you how hard, Taylor, myself, a lot of people who are collaborating with the administration to try to get them to do the right thing, that we are pushing for an across the board motion to reopen for people that are in absentia or for people whose cases were denied without due process. We are really pushing for that. So I have no crystal ball to tell me what phase 2 and phase 3 is going to be. I wish I did, but I think we have to wait. As good lawyers, we have to wait. And unless you have, about 60 hours of time that you want to put into putting together a motion to reopen in the right way, because otherwise you won't win. You won't win.
Yeah.
I love that, Jodi. I'm sorry to talk. I just thank you so much for that. And for anybody who's listening who doesn't know who Jodi is the expert on motions to reopen in the Fifth Circuit in particular, the famosa. And what I worry about, from what I hear about well-meaning attorneys, maybe who don't do this work as much, I'm worried about this active case thing is going to turn into a lot of people kind of maybe churning out motions to reopen before we're to the point where either we're pushing for either EOIR having some sort of an order to broadly reopen these cases, or to just repaper people. That would be ideal, to just straight up repaper people, or for OPLA to agree to joint motions to reopen, to agree to non-ops. But until we're to that point, I agree with Jodi, in the vast majority of the cases, it's not time to file right now. And it's not because I don't think that you're a good enough lawyer to do it, but it's just not time to do it right now unless the case is extremely persuasive. And I hope that message comes across, because we're talking about 40,000 people or something.
Yeah, that's really good information, because we had talked about doing a motion to reopen, because there are all these people who are not going to be considered active cases. And so we had talked about, and laid the groundwork for starting a motion to reopen project that hopefully it wouldn't just be willy-nilly, but a legitimate one. And so having the intel that, there might be a much more broad set of circumstances where people will be able to get in much more easily in that way, either through, being repapered or through some kind of order requiring judges to grant them more liberally than normal is really helpful, especially because there are, numerical bars, things of that nature. And so sometimes when you take your shot, you take your shot. And so that's really good to know.
It's important, Lindsay, that we point out that there is precedent for generalized motions to reopen. I mean, there's precedent where EOIR and OBLA have come out with regulations to allow, or a policy to allow generalized motions to reopen. NACARA comes to mind, HRIFA comes to mind, St. Cyr comes to mind. I mean, the courts and OBLA are very well familiar with the fact that they can do these generalized motions to reopen that require, a very limited set of circumstances and evidence to be presented in a bare bones motion to reopen to be granted. So I think that we really can't overemphasize that we wait just a bit to see what happens. Otherwise, if you're gonna, posture up a case to do a motion to reopen, just realize that you're in for a lot of work.
Yeah, for sure. One of the other things I wanted to ask you all about what you would advise is we have a lot of attorneys that have cases that are currently scheduled for individual calendar hearings in March. And, they've been told appropriately to just prepare as if the case will go, even though we think it's very unlikely it will not. Now that we know that people are going to start to get processed in, there's this question of whether we continue to prepare or file, because, sometimes a case is going to look a lot better. You keep getting the documents, but in terms of filing, case law is going to change, hopefully, 3 years down the road or a year down the road or 6 months down the road. And so for folks that have hearings in March, April, May, what do you advise in terms of prep, not only prep, but filing as well?
Okay, well, Taylor doesn't do individual cases, and I do, and I'll tell you what I'm doing. I am not prepping those cases because I am, whatever smidgen of a percentage that's less than 100% sure that those MPP cases are not going to go forward. I mean, as it is right now, we already are canceled through March 19th through official announcements. But given the fact that the program is been terminated, and now we have instructions from the administration to process everyone in, there is absolutely no scenario that I can imagine where those individual calendars at the MPP courts are going to go forward. That being said, I want to give you 2 examples of cases that I've processed in through paroles in the last couple of weeks. Example number 1, individual gets processed in to be taken out of MPP with, of course, no guarantee that they'd be paroled or detained. They were detained for a brief period of time. After 2 weeks, I was able to get him out of detention. His case got transferred from the MPP docket to the detained docket. And then once he was released from detention, it got transferred from the detained docket to the Harlingen non-detained docket, because that was the main court for his MPP case. The Harlingen case is now scheduled in April for a master, not a meriting. He's not scheduled for a merit, but the guy went to Chicago. So I'm going to file a change of venue to get his case into Chicago, which I imagine he'll get a master first in Chicago before he'll get a merit date. Okay. So the case court sort of went around. It made the loops. It went from MPP court to detained court to non-detained court. And now it's going to get transferred up to Chicago on a change of venue. Second scenario, another person that I got paroled in, once they were actually paroled in, this person was not detained. They were actually given a new court date in Harlingen for April 1 or something like that. It's a master as well. It's not an individual. So I'm not really sure how it's going to work out when people get processed in and how quickly those court dates will come around. I was really shocked to see that there was a quick court date for this person. But that court date wasn't an individual, it was a master. So who knows what's going to happen. But I 100% believe that those MPP individual calendar dates will not go forward. And I mean, okay, I'll just say it live. I have several mentees within VECINA who are in this situation that you talk about. And I've told them, stand down on your anxiety levels. I don't think that you're going to need to have any filings ready, in the next 2 weeks. It's more important at this point to make sure that your clients have the information available to sign up for the registration website through ACNUR, and to be prepared to file a motion to change venue to wherever it is that they're going to be going.
And can I give an answer as well? Yes.
Of
So I'm going to say that
of course.
I love Jodi to death, and Jodi has much more experience than me, and I do not have any individuals, but I'll say two things. One, Jodi, respectfully, the March 19th date is not actually the MPP date. The March 19th date is that courts are currently closed, or are still currently closed. Technically, right. MPP is in a different system, and the MPP cases are closed because we have not met these arbitrary metrics the Trump administration created. We are so far away from those arbitrary metrics. They haven't announced a different system for that. We're not even remotely close. It has to do with like what phase COVID contagion rates are and everything else. I think there's just absolutely no chance of MPP courts starting again. Absolutely no chance. But it's not actually the March 19th deadline, because I just like to point that out. MPP courts specifically, at least until Biden came into power, MPP courts were supposed to be reset every 15 days. So they were only resetting them 15 days out, regardless of whether or not the controlling court was closed up until the 19th, up until the 19th, up until the 19th. So what we do seem to see a little bit right now is that a lot of folks with their portal are reporting that they no longer have a date listed. They just have listed that their case is pending. And so people are seeing that when they go into the EOIR portal, which makes more sense than EOIR clerks literally taking time to give them fake dates that we know are never going to happen. So it appears that at least some courts perhaps have taken this mindset of just writing pending instead of giving them a specific date. So that's a possibility. I personally, if I had an individual, if I was mentoring someone, I would tell them not to worry about the filing deadline. I will say, at least just for a cover my ass type of perspective, they're the attorney of record. They have a filing deadline. They need to make that choice on their own, I think, in terms of, but I think Jodi disagrees with me. I can see on your face. I don't think there's any point to try and meet that filing deadline either, but I'm just saying, if you're the attorney of record, you're the attorney of record, and I don't want to be on the internet right now telling people not to file, and then later have IJs, freaking out that Taylor said not to file. I don't think they need to file though either. I think that it's very clear these MPP courts aren't going to go forward. One other thing I'll say with that I don't think we covered, no official announcements, but all the conversations we've been having is that the MPP court transfer of venue will be done by the government as a transfer of venue to their home courts based upon where they're going. The migrants most likely will submit something like an E33 or something along those lines. I don't know exactly, but theoretically speaking, at least unofficially, the government is supposed to be taking care of the transfer of venues. And luckily, hopefully, if it goes according to plan, unofficially, it will not be a transfer of venue, for example, from the MPP docket to the normal docket. It won't be like that, which we've seen in the past, exactly like the cases that Jodi just explained. Hopefully, people going through this official system will be taken from the MPP docket and transferred to wherever their home court is. And that'll be an administrative transfer to the home court, not to the normal non-detained docket. Best practices, anyone who's represented would be to still file a motion to change venue and keep track of the portal and keep track of making sure that individual cases don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, and we're talking about the portal, and just in case there are any mentees out there that don't know, if you Google like EOIR case status portal or case system check, you can actually put in your client's A number and it will list the date and time of their next hearing. It used to be that people were given paper notices. And now document service hasn't been happening for some time for MPP folks, and so they can go online and check. And so you can just do that with your clients. You don't have to be registered or anything like that. You just can go online and check. So Anything else? I think we've covered all of the things on my list: changes of venue, open cases. Just to reiterate, big things to tell your client: registration opens Friday. Please stay where you are until you are instructed to do otherwise. And hope is on the way. We don't know how quickly, but it's coming, right?
Hope is on the way.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. And yeah, take care. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yay. Thank you all. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Bye.
For coming.